She never imagined she'd be telling this story. Never thought her sister's disappearance would unravel a chain of truths she wasn't prepared for. This is what really happened. They were sisters, inseparable through childhood. The older one, Eleanor, was her protector, her guide, and her confidant. But when Eleanor disappeared 2 years ago, their bond was shattered, and what came next was unimaginable. Outside a small suburban home, the younger sister lingers in the driveway, her gaze fixed on the house as an unsettling sense of dread begins to take hold. It started on an ordinary Friday. Elena had sent her sister a simple text. Home safe. See you tomorrow. Routine. Comforting. But when she didn't show up for their breakfast plans the next morning, unease quickly turned into dread. The front door was locked, her car was in the driveway, and her phone went straight to voicemail. The police would later call it a voluntary disappearance, insisting there was no sign of foul play. But she knew her sister better than anyone. Elena wouldn't just leave. Months passed with no answers. Desperation led her to dig through Eleanor's belongings, searching for clues. That's when she found it, a name reduced to a single letter in the margin of an old photo. J. It wasn't much, but it was something. The younger sister sits in her car under the cover of night, parked outside a dive bar illuminated by a flickering neon sign. Gripping a photo tightly in her hand, she fixes her gaze on the bar's entrance. The man in the photo was someone Eleanor had never mentioned, a former boyfriend. She found him in a rundown bar on the outskirts of town, but his reaction to her questions wasn't what she expected. Inside the bar, the man, Jake, shifts uneasily, his eyes darting around as he avoids making direct eye contact. He stammered, swearing he hadn't seen Elena in years. His words seemed sincere, but the way he avoided her gaze said otherwise. He was hiding something. Jake leaves the bar hurriedly. The younger sister follows him, parking outside a dingy motel as Jake enters a room. She followed him, unable to shake the feeling that he knew more than he let on. What she found in his motel room confirmed her suspicions and changed everything. Inside the dimly lit motel room, she slips in quietly while Jake is away. There, on a desk piled with crumpled papers and empty beer cans, was a notebook. Page after page listed names, dates and addresses. Elena's name was one of them, but she wasn't alone. There were dozens of others, all women, all missing. Jake returns, prompting the younger sister to quickly hide in the closet. Peering through the slats, she watches as he paces the room, speaking urgently on the phone. His voice sharp and panicked. He swore to the person on the other end that he didn't know where Eleanor was. He insisted he'd done his part, begging to be left out of whatever was coming next. The younger sister sits in her car, her fingers swiping across the screen of her phone. Every name in the notebook was connected to a missing persons case. Each entry marked a woman who had vanished without a trace. The dates? They matched the days they were last seen. And the addresses? They were their last known locations. At the police station, she hands the notebook to a detective. His expression grows increasingly grim as he flips through its pages. She thought she had finally uncovered the key to bringing Eleanor home, but the truth wasn't what she expected. The officer explained that Eleanor wasn't just a victim, she was involved. The notebook wasn't just a record, it was a tool she'd used to track others. Her sister had been part of the operation. In the weeks that followed, she tried to piece together the puzzle. Why would Eleanor be involved in something so dark? That's when she found the letter, a message Eleanor had written long before she disappeared. In the letter, Eleanor explained everything. She had been forced into the operation and had been trying to escape. "If you're reading this," the letter said, "I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out. I did what I had to survive. And now they're coming for you too. Run." And that's when she realized she wasn't alone. Some truths aren't meant to be uncovered. It was supposed to be a way out, a job that promised opportunity, money, and the chance to send something back to their families. But for those aboard the fishing vessel Ocean Horizon, it became a floating prison. This is the story of one survivor who lived to tell the tale, and the chilling truth behind what happened on that ship. He was desperate. They all were. Promised good pay, decent conditions, and a way to escape poverty, he signed on without a second thought. But he should have known. Anything too good to be true usually is. The first few days were uneventful. Hard work, sure, but manageable. He kept telling himself it would all be worth it when he sent his first paycheck home. But soon, cracks began to show. At dawn, he is jolted awake by shouting. The captain bursts into the sleeping quarters, barking commands in a language unfamiliar to many. Chaos erupts as the crew scrambles in confusion. Discipline came quickly and harshly. If you were slow, you were punished. If you misunderstood, you were punished. And if you spoke up, well, you learned not to. On deck, a worker collapses from sheer exhaustion. Another crew member hesitates to assist, casting a wary glance at the intimidating figure of an officer nearby. They pushed them to the brink, working endless hours with barely enough food or water. Exhaustion was a constant companion, but that was just the beginning. At first he thought it was paranoia, whispers about punishments that went too far, about men disappearing, never to return. But when it happened to someone he knew, the whispers became reality. Disobedience wasn't tolerated, and when you were on the open ocean, there was nowhere to run, no one to call for help. Malnutrition set in quickly. The food they were given was barely edible, the water rationed to the point of cruelty. Every day became a battle, against hunger, against thirst, against despair. With supplies running low, the men grew desperate. Fights erupted over scraps of food. Bonds forged in desperation shattered under the weight of survival. Some whispered of escape, but even that was a gamble. The ocean was vast, and the officers were ruthless. He knew the risk, but every day the idea seemed less like a dream and more like the only option. The storm was a turning point. As the ship fought against the waves, the crew realized they were expendable. One by one they began to break. They weren't just cruel, they were sadistic, flaunting their power while the rest of the men starved. It was clear they didn't care if the crew made it back alive. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Wait for the officers to drink themselves into a stupor, sneak past the guards, and take the lifeboat. It was madness, but madness felt better than staying. He and his allies make their move, their hearts racing. Suddenly, one of them stumbles, causing a loud crash. The scene shifts to an officer stirring awake, reaching for his flashlight. They were so close. But then, a single mistake turned everything upside down. They caught them, dragged them back like animals. He thought it was the end, that he'd die there on that cursed ship. But then something changed. Fate intervened in the form of a patrol ship. The officers scrambled to hide the evidence of their abuse, but it was too late. The patrol team boarded, and the truth came spilling out. He was one of the lucky ones, rescued but scarred. The stories he told shocked the world about the abuse, the starvation, the inhumanity. But for him, it wasn't about justice, it was about survival. Even after everything, the cycle continues. Desperate men taking desperate chances, not knowing what awaits them on the open sea. He survived, but how many others won't? The sea holds many secrets, but some shouldn't stay hidden. Stories like his remind us of the cost of desperation and the monsters that thrive in the shadows of our world. If you're enjoying these stories so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Your support motivates us to keep creating even more great content. Now back to our final story. On a foggy autumn morning, Jane left her house for school, her backpack slung over her shoulder and her mother's warning fresh in her ears. A serial killer was on the loose, and the latest victim had been found just hours before. Her mother's words were laced with fear as she reminded Jane to stay alert. The killer's shadow had crept too close to their quiet neighborhood. Jane tried to shake the unease as she headed to school. She wasn't alone in her fear. Whispers of the killer's gruesome mark spread quickly through the hallways that morning, a burned circle etched into the skin of each victim. Only one person seemed unfazed: Alice, Jane's best friend since kindergarten. Bright, confident, and always composed, Alice was the type of friend who made everything feel manageable. But sometimes, even the ones you trust most have secrets. That same morning, Jane noticed someone new, a janitor. Quiet, polite, and unassuming, he blended into the background, cleaning up messes and avoiding eye contact. He seemed harmless, but there was something about him Jane couldn't quite put her finger on. The staff praised his work ethic, and the students barely noticed him. But after the fourth victim was revealed to be a student from their own school, Jane's attention lingered on him a little longer. Her gut told her something was off. She noticed his eyes lingering too long, his hurried steps in empty hallways, and the way he always seemed to appear when no one else was around. Jane decided to trust her instincts. One late afternoon, she followed the janitor as he carried a heavy box into the school's basement. The sound of the creaking door echoed down the empty corridor. Heart pounding, Jane waited until the janitor left before creeping into the dimly lit basement. Dusty shelves and old lockers surrounded her, but her eyes locked onto a corner where the box had been stashed. Inside, she found papers covered in scribbled notes, photographs of the victims, and a haunting sketch of the burned circle. Her worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just a janitor, this was the killer. Jane didn't waste a second. She handed the evidence over to the school principal, who immediately contacted the authorities. By the end of the day, the janitor was arrested in front of the entire school. For the first time in weeks, Jane felt a sense of relief. The killer was caught. The nightmare was finally over, or so she thought. A few days later, Jane asked Alice if she could borrow her math notes. Alice handed over a notebook with a smile, telling Jane to study hard. But that evening, when Jane opened the notebook, she realized it wasn't math notes at all. It was a diary. At first, the entries seemed innocent, school gossip and musings about life, but as she read on, the tone shifted. The words grew darker, colder, detached. Jane's breath caught as she read one chilling line: "Decided to become a serial killer. It felt liberating." The diary described every detail: the planning, the victims, even the burned circle. And then came the most horrifying confession. The janitor was the perfect scapegoat, so easy to frame. Alice had done it. Every murder, every burned mark, every carefully placed piece of evidence, it was all her, and Jane had helped put an innocent man behind bars. Jane's heart raced as she tried to process the betrayal. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp buzz of her phone. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Alice. "Hey, Jane. I just realized I gave you the wrong notebook. Can I swing by and grab it? I'm already outside." Jane froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, but Alice was already there, waiting. What would you do if you knew the truth? Could you open the door? If you loved this episode, be sure to check out our other videos. Thank you for watching. See you on our next video.